Welcome to Hypnotic Authenticity. This is a place to reflect, a place to unwind perhaps, to understand yourself a little better, and to gently reshape the patterns that guide your life. A little bit like a conversation between you and your deeper self. So I'm offering a sprinkling of hypnosis, insight, some meditative guidance, and it's all going to be woven throughout a deep sense of practicality. So that if I do my job well, each episode is going to help you feel more grounded, also more open, and more authentically you. So if you're ready, let's begin. I'm going to talk to you about relationships today. I am by no means a relationship coach. But what I've observed is that when people come along to solve certain issues, frequently behind the presenting issue, let's say, there is some element of dissatisfaction or frustration or a dynamic in a relationship which is underpinning the issue that they come to me with. It's like the relationship maintains the problem or supports it. And so the reason why I'm going to talk about this today is because it's kind of important for you to understand where I'm coming from, even though I don't explicitly support people in their relationship challenges, but because it just kind of permeates across, well, it kind of permeates across everything, because the challenging thing with relationships, especially intimate relationships, but family relationships as well, is that we're in them all the time. And so they have the capability to trigger any element of our kind of personal development which has not been integrated. Any potential unresolved issue is going to be stimulated by our relationships with our significant others, but because by definition they are significant, because they're important to us, and so we care. And so we tend to want to prove ourselves right. Our ego tends to get in the way with those people more than it might with a stranger. So there's a few ways to look at relationships. I think the most useful way to look at a relationship in general, especially when you're not getting out of it what you might hope for, is, well, there's a lot of things, actually. One is, what are the stories running around in your mind about how you expect to be treated and how you expect to feel? For example, if this is a love relationship, it might be worth really deeply considering what your definition of love is, how you know when you are in love. What is the feeling, the epitome of the feeling? And are you chasing that feeling with somebody else? Because, I guess this is something that we'll discuss in another issue. But ultimately, if you are handing over the expectation of that feeling to somebody else, then you are kind of deluding yourself. You're also handing over your personal power. Basically, we all have the ability to create the emotional reality and the perspective and the perception that we choose to do so. And if we expect somebody else to provide that to us, then it's bound to end up frustrating. So yeah, the thing is, there are so many messages going around in the universe about love, songs and books and films, how it's supposed to feel, how you're supposed to act. And these things that kind of play on our mind all the time. So if our experience doesn't match up with our expectation, that in itself can create frustration. So I think it's very useful to consider, I have this kind of, this affinity with sad songs, which means that there is an element of my definition of love which requires an element of sadness, an element of pain, in order to tick that checkbox of, oh yeah, this is how real love should feel, thanks to some silly teenage songs, effectively. So these kind of things, they run around in the background of your story. And if you don't consider them, then, you find yourself inadvertently chasing something which isn't really of your making. So that's one thing which is kind of interesting. Another thing is this idea of, well, look, when you're with somebody, let's stick with romantic relationships for the time being. Let's not go into family relationships. When you're with someone, they are kind of like an antidote to loneliness, right? But loneliness is a human condition. A lot of people will use a relationship as a distraction to avoid themselves. Again, kind of putting the responsibility on somebody else's shoulders. It's very useful to be able to blame someone else for your problems. I think a lot of the problems that come in relationships come by virtue of someone not being comfortable being on their own, simply existing in a state of solitude and owning their full range of emotions, their full experience. And so they get out of that by kind of handing it to this story with another person. It's a strange kind of delusion, but it's very effective. You know, in a way, you could consider a relationship to be similar to a sort of an addiction almost. You can find yourself soothing through a relationship rather than giving through a relationship, okay? Which then develops into the more subtle aspects of a relationship, which are the give and take and the needs that you are looking to fulfill. So this is all down to boundaries, right? It still goes back to this idea of being comfortable in your solitude. When you understand yourself well, when you understand your values, your motivations, the meanings that you attach to yourself, to others, to the world, the stories that are running around inside of your head, you have much less expectation of other people. And you are much more comfortable simply being yourself. And what happens is you kind of get this perspective about your boundaries, about what is under your control, what is in anybody else's control, where the line is between those two. Imagine a sort of an imaginary boundary of energy. And because you have less expectations of others, it's easier to manage that boundary. So you can drop the boundary when you choose to do so. So you can have an intimate sharing relationship with someone because you know that this is a right and fruitful, experiential moment to relax your boundary, to share your feelings, your thoughts, your wants, your desires, and similarly to give unconditionally to somebody else, to share in their wants and desires, and to build something between you which is based around that mutually beneficial sense of giving. When you're not comfortable inside yourself, your boundaries are generally leaky, and you're trying to plug them with anything that you can find, including other people. And so if your boundaries aren't strong and rational and understood, you can manipulate, or you can try to manipulate other people to deliver your needs, and especially to do so by sort of meandering methods. So you won't be explicit. So if your boundaries aren't strong, you'll actually start manipulating as well. And similarly, you will find that the other person will probably do that to you too, right? Because of the sheer fact that relationships are so all-encompassing and they trigger every single possible area of vulnerability inside of us. So if we're not careful, it just happens on autopilot that we try and find these solutions elsewhere, which is outside of us. So you might find yourself on the receiving end of the same thing that you're guilty of doing yourself. So then you get into this whole idea of triggering and what it is to be triggered. And how do you choose your response rather than simply reacting when you are attacked by a stimulus. And of course, the rational way to do that, or one rational way to do that, is to understand that in simply the same way that you can sometimes run on your own rails, just automatically go on autopilot and say something which is nonsensical or do something which is nonsensical and wonder why on earth you've said it after the point, well, so does everybody else, right? That we're all in this human soup together and we're all equally fallible. And so that again goes back to this idea of being comfortable inside of yourself and therefore permitting yourself to be human, to be fallible, to make mistakes, and therefore understanding that everybody else is just as fallible and human and mistake prone as you are. So yes, so all of that sits within this idea of boundaries. Okay, let's go to the ego. Well, let me be honest, right? I've got a pretty big ego, actually. I have a strong sense of myself, let's say. I couple that to the extent that I can with humility, okay? So at least I understand that I have that strong sense of conviction, of courage, I guess you would say. But that can lead to stubbornness. It can lead to determination. And all these things are great in certain moments. So if you're in a life-saving situation, you want to be determined, you want to be stubborn, you want to be focused. But when you're in a relationship, there can be times when you have to confront the question of, do I want to be right or do I want to be in a relationship? Because those two may be well in conflict. How important is it to be right with someone that you truly care about? Because let's be honest, right? You already know how you feel inside. There is no need to defend that. And the more you try and defend that, the more the other person is likely to respond by reacting in a triggered fashion and defend their position, and nobody wins. Whereas in actual fact, you're both winning by simply accepting that the other has a point of view, right? Which is equally right, wrong, or indifferent to your point of view. So these are the fascinating issues, I think, that come out of relationships. Relationships are brilliant, right? They allow you to see yourself in ways that you couldn't possibly see yourself, right? And the sheer fact that this person is someone who is so important to you gives that perspective added oomph, added value. So it's a fantastic thing. You share so much joy, so much friendship, so much. It's like an expanded awareness. The experience is richer of living your life to a certain extent, right? Because you have that reflection, that reverberation. But it's very complicated. So, hey, such is life. So I think that gives you an idea of where I'm coming from in relationships. I've just realized I haven't even talked about the family structure. So the family structure, consider this as a system. And we have lots of systems, right? We have the intimate relationship system, we have the family system, we have the work system, we have the village system, we have the city system, we have the universal system. They're all like little systems within systems within systems within systems. And the way that I understand systems is that they find a way of balancing. That each component part, when combined with all the others in the system, finds a kind of an equilibrium. When children come along, they fit in to the family system in order to maintain the equilibrium and can actually become a component part of maintaining that equilibrium, which is very, very interesting to delve into. But the idea of that is that the entire system is maintaining itself through the evolution of the participants. So consider your family relationships from that perspective. The other thing to consider, therefore, is that if you make a change, no matter how subtle, it affects the systems that you evolve inside. And so other people will respond. They will have to take account in order for that system to maintain its equilibrium.
So if you go from a position of being an individual who is determined to prove themselves right, who's irritable, who's frustrated, who's resentful for the issues on the world, blames other people for that, and you suddenly find the perspective that you're telling yourself a story, and that actually the world is very, very rich and vibrant and filled with opportunities if only you give yourself the opportunity to look, the freedom to look. Just imagine the impact that that has on your family system or your work system. Imagine the impact that it has in your job. Imagine that you're a salesperson and suddenly you gain that perspective. So suddenly you're no longer pushing hard against the system and selling, but instead you're understanding the relationship between and how to fit in with that, how to understand people more intuitively and deliver what they want so that everybody benefits, everybody wins. So systems theory is an amazing concept. Let's assume it's a metaphor like every other metaphor. Before I go rambling off on a new path, let's call that one a day. So I hope it's useful. And if it is, let me know. And if you've got questions, let me know. And I promise you, I will do my best to respond. Thank you very much. Sorry, it's a bit long, that one, but it's a meaty topic.
Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If it resonates with you, then follow my podcast. I would also personally be really grateful if you might wish to leave a quick rating. It genuinely helps others to discover the podcast. If you personally would like more guided meditations, you want some deeper insights, you'll find all my links in the description. If you prefer a more visual boost, then you might want to check out my YouTube channel called Authentic Life Hypnosis. And if you're looking to do some deeper work that goes beyond one-way audio, then obviously you're very welcome to reach out. Equally, if you have any questions, I'm here to help. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.